Okay, we're going to call this City Commission study session part 1 of the day to order. All please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And we begin this meeting, as we do, with our acknowledgement that the land on which we gather is the territory of the Ottawa and Chippewa peoples who have stewarded this land through the generations. Thank you for your strength and resilience in protecting this land and inspiring us to uphold our responsibilities to do the same. And as we mentioned, this is our first study session today. There will be a joint session with the Planning Commission this evening at our usual 7 o'clock time. This is a time for us just to go over our strategic plan with David from Future IQ. Thank you for coming back again. We always look forward to seeing you, and I will hand it over to Benjamin to get the conversation started then.
Great, thank you, Mayor Shammer. I just wanted to acknowledge that Mayor Pro Tem Wilson indicated he's not able to attend today's meetings. I want to thank the city staff leadership team for being here. I had shared in the cover memo that the objectives and key results ultimately, which will be adopted by the next city commission, will guide department level work plans and my co-creation with each department director of their evaluations and those department level work plans. Really the goal, the aim for today is for the commission to have a discussion. David's not going to do the dots on paper sort of thing. He's going to lead us through this conversation, and staff's going to work to distill what we hear from you, and then we'll bring that back to you, the language back, as we work to form these draft OKRs so that there's clarity along the way. And I want to thank everybody from the public as well as the candidates for city commission who are here too. And I'm looking forward to listening a whole lot. Thank you.
And since we don't have a formal kind of mic with the clerk over there, she has it for her time, but I just wanted to remind people to move the mic around as necessary. This is being recorded. This isn't just for amplification. So do try to move your mics around if you're a little bit further away from one so that your answers will be on record. And with that, I will hand it over to David, who is mic'd.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mayor, Council, Commissioners. How are you? Glad to be back. I actually think this is a great point in this conversation, Benjamin. So to sort of echo your comments, I think this is a really important opportunity to take the work of the strategic planning, which really where we ended with the dashboard was some recognition that there was a set of priorities that the community was talking about that weren't really well reflected in the city's operations at the current stage. So this is, I think, the start of a number of conversations where we're going to explore what would better alignment look like. What are the elements that you think are missing or need to be kind of enhanced? I do want to just put in a sort of a point here, however, that we're talking about a whole city budget, right? Now, a fair bit of the city budget, I don't know what the exact figure, but I guess it would be 60 or 70% of a city budget. It's going to be basically obligation. It's going to be things that you're required to provide. The strategic planning work and the visioning work was really, I think, looking at what you might call more the discretionary component, right? So we didn't really get into the challenging the sort of basic obligation work. So it's not the entire kind of component we're looking at. I think that's always important to bear in mind that we're going to be talking about some alignment, but we're not talking about everything that the city's required to deliver and so on. I think that's part of what we'll have to unpack as we go through this conversation. What I have, I've got some data here. I want to share with you the results from the survey that I think everybody at the table here did take, as well as a number of the candidates. The point of that survey was really to get your first reaction about how well aligned or not we are. And I want to walk through today each pillar. And I really am going to ask as commissioners that you, like a conversation, what would it look like if it was better? What do we need to be doing differently to align better? So it's very much an exploration today. It's not a decision making, it's not a kind of eliminating, but it's trying to understand what in your mind as commissioners, if we've got a bit of a gap between what we think we're currently doing and what we think we should be doing, what does that look like? How do we close that gap? To show you some of the data, obviously we're working with these 6 strategic pillars that were developed through the strategic planning process. This was data from the strategic planning process. So this was just looking at, we were ranking the pillars, or we're asking the community to rank the pillars in terms of their positive impact. And they all came up as important. That scale was a 1 to 5 scale. The data from the survey, and I want to present this really as preliminary data, and for commissioners, this is in the material I did in the output, it's in front of you, you can use that as a worksheet if you want. This was asking the question about how well aligned are the existing budget and programs of the city with those pillars, right? And 1 being not at all, or sorry, very poorly aligned on the left-hand side, and 10 being very well aligned on the right-hand side. I don't know what your take on that is, but to me it looks like at best we're, on a few of them, we're kind of maybe in the middle, right? And as we actually go through the actions, you'll see it degrade, might not be the right word, but there's less alignment as we go through. So it was a little bit of an epiphany for me actually when I was looking at this data. Because as we go into it, you'll see that there are some areas where there's quite significant misalignment from what the budget and programs are to what you think the city should be doing in reflecting the community aspirations. And it did give me an insight into how difficult it must be to govern as commissioners in that environment where I think there's, and I've watched a number of your meetings, and I've often had the sense that there's, it doesn't feel quite right. We can't kind of put our finger on it. It doesn't feel quite right. And I think what this data is going to reflect is that sort of sense of a tension between, what you're being presented with as commissioners from, the budgets and programs and what you, reflecting in the community see as the priorities need to be.
And the fact that we haven't even begun to build a budget with these in mind, right? Like this is brand new. So it's not surprising that there's not a tremendous amount of alignment, I think.
Yeah, and it's not meant to be at all critical. I mean, I think it's
right.
You're a city obviously that's going through evolution, right? And you're dealing with challenges today and shifting social values and all those things that are going on. And so any city is going to be continually trying to adapt and evolve as you go forward. And that's point of the strategic planning process was to let's recast our net for the next sort of 5 or 10 years. So not surprisingly, there's some misalignment. I think what I was speaking to Benjamin is I think that there's some components there, there's significant misalignment, right? And I think what we're going to have to talk about at the table here is, well, what does that look like? What do we need to be tweaking here to change that? So that's at the level of the pillars, right? I really wanted to spend the time on each one. So the first pillar was the proactively managing urban design. Obviously, this was a really interesting and important pillar in the planning process. And I'm going to show you data at each one of these. So this was from the dashboard, which was the last piece that I presented to you. So under this pillar, we had these 4 action areas: proactively design the future of the corridors, building guidelines, people-centric street design, intentionally design more community connection points. This was the sort of overall priority that was given by the community in the prioritisation survey, the scale being the darker the colour, the higher the priority. We then did a sort of very subjective, I'll say, but an initial subjective kind of view of, well, what's the city kind of doing, where does it fit in terms of progress against these action areas? So the darker the colour, the more the substantial the progress. And obviously what started to jump out is we saw some kind of both alignment of priorities and progress, but also some mismatches. What I did in this survey, and I asked you as well as the candidates to respond to, was how well aligned do we think those, at the level of those actions, how well aligned is the budget and programs to fulfil on those action areas? And again, 1 being very poorly aligned and 10 being very well aligned. So you can see there the sum barely get off the mark, right? And you'll see that as we go through. Actually, there'll be 1 action that will be, perhaps quite low in a pillar. So I wanted to this is the data I'm going to show you for each of the pillars. I think I'd love to just kick it around the table, right? So obviously, proactively manage urban design was seen in the strategic planning as a really important focus area. I think that was a lot about the character and how do you just not become blah anywhere, and how do you preserve that sort of authenticity of your community. But by your own judgment, 5.5 sort of the middle point on this. We're below the centre and obviously leaning towards the poorly aligned. I would love to just perhaps, and I'd like to do this for each one, and we go around the table, right, and hear from each of the commissioners. What do you think we need to be working on that would make us better aligned, right? What do you think we need to be thinking about to close that gap? And as you said, Benjamin, we're just going to listen, right? And we're obviously going to record this and transcribe it. We'll then take your sort of input, and obviously, I think the next step is we'll be coming back with, well, here's a set of what budgets and programs could look like. Does this better reflect things, right? But we really just want to get your pulse, right? And maybe, Jackie, if we could start with you, and I would just love to go around the table and just give each of you a chance to say, well, what do we need to be thinking about at the level of budget and programs to get stronger alignment with what are those priorities that come up? And Jackie, we'll go with you, and then Tim will loop around the table. So, Jackie, would you like to take us away?
Well, I think that obviously focusing on the lowest rated, which is localized building design guidelines, there are some conversations in the Planning Commission that have started around that. Although at this point, they kind of grew out of a discussion about exterior cladding materials and what was appropriate and how to interpret what was in our zoning code. So if that is a starting point, the question is how far can we take that? Can we, within the limitations of the city charter, which apparently minimizes our opportunity to use design guidelines for 1 and 2 family dwellings. But other structures within the city seem to me that we could find a way to develop some guidelines that would achieve that preservation of character and authenticity that was valued in the prior research.
Yeah. Okay. Tim?
I'll try to make 2 quick comments then. I'll start with the not optimistic, then go to the optimistic one. So the first gets to design of future key corridors. Planning Commission had a corridor master plan 11 years ago, plus or minus, which was great. But to me, it kind of shows that we can say as a community, this is what we want, but then largely it's private land. And when somebody just keeps it in the family because they want their grandchildren to have the opportunity to develop that empty parking lot or that empty lot someday, it can be frustrating for the community. So I'm thinking of 8th Street and the big corner there. And I just recently heard that, the owner, he wants to leave it, for his kids sort of thing. And it's been empty for decades. So that can be frustrating for the community because we don't have a lever to push on. Like the best thing is probably not from the city, but from the community to try to use, soft influence, much like the Land Conservancy does. They build relationships over decades to try to move things forward, and maybe eventually it happens, but that's not a really very satisfying answer to say, oh, maybe in a decade we can get an empty lot to be not an empty lot. So that's the not so optimistic, because I'm not sure what the answer is to encourage private landowners to do something with their land. The numbers 3 and 4 to me tie together, in my mind at least, with the complete streets policy that'll be coming forward soon. And I'm very encouraged by that. Commissioner Stanley and the mayor worked on an earlier draft of that, a few years ago, but we got sidelined for various reasons as a city. And then more recently, Commissioner Shaw, Mayor Pro Tem, and myself have been working on it with city staff and made some real good progress. And I think even though it doesn't address 3 and 4 in those words specifically, I think it's very much tied to that, because it's about, all people being able to get wherever it is they want to go and feeling comfortable. So it, again, in my mind, ties to 3 and 4 pretty well. So I'm optimistic for those.
Yeah, it's a really good point, because there is, like, the next step on this is to think about what tools do we have, right? And what capacity or limitations that we may confront as we go down this path. So thank you. Please.
I agree with Commissioner Werner about 3 and 4. I think that the Complete Streets policy and the advisory board, the future advisory board, are really moving forward on that. And I hope the 1% budget allocation is still valid. Please. Going up to number 1, that's where I see an issue, because we're working off a 2014 corridors master plan. That's 11 years ago, like Commissioner Werner said. And in particular, I'm worried about 7th Street. What kind of corridor is that? Because those are the 2 corridors that were specifically called out in this staff-generated, how are we doing dashboard summary thing, 7th Street and 14th Street. So, what kind of corridor is that? Do we need corridors that are more car-centric and other corridors that are more bike and pedestrian-centric? Is Cass a corridor to get north and south? Is Union a corridor to get north and south? I think we need to dig deeper into this. We need we need a more current visioning of how we want to get around. People weren't riding bikes as much as 11 years ago as they are now. Every year it's exponentially taking off, and which is a great thing, but we need safe ways to get around town. Let's see. And then for the number 2, I'm encouraged by the discussion going on at the Planning Commission right now about materials and sticking to our guns as far as what kind of materials we're going to use here in Traverse City. I'd also really like to look at pre-approved ADA plans. I think that would be something that we may be able to it may not cost much of anything at all to have them made or to borrow them from somewhere, and then we approve them, and then they are available for our residents.
ADU.
ADU.
Okay.
Yeah, ADU, not ADA. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'm seeing 1 and 4 as things that we actually can do a little more, since that is directly dealing with planning for the future. Not that all 4 items don't involve some planning work, but that is inherent to the goal of those 2 objectives, is to develop a plan. Like for number 1, in the master plan, it identified several key corridors, and the Planning Commission has 3 of those on their goals for this coming year. They've already dealt with part of the Union Street corridor, but 14th Street and West Front Street are identified in there. So I'd say that that's aligned with what steps are already being taken. 2 and 3, well, 3 to a lesser extent, because there are things we can change, but we're not going to be making, in the short term, radical changes to what our streets look like, our street network. We can change the alignment of parking or the flow of traffic, but as we've seen with State Street, that can be a process that we learn from, and it might require trials here and there. On number 2, although it is something that, according to this data, there's more disalignment between where we are and where people think we should be with our budget and programs. A lot of that isn't something that we can directly control to the same extent. Yes, we can put out guidelines, but that will only affect what new construction happens, and somebody could be very upset about their neighbor doing a renovation for their house, that they put on all vinyl siding over a brick house, and they put on a metal roof, and it clashes with the neighborhood. But if nothing that they do required a building permit, then at no point would that actually touch the city permitting and planning zoning process.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
So lots of good points already. It's nice coming towards the end. So the couple things that I appreciated Jackie's statement, basically, because I think that's about where I'm at of the building design opportunities. There's things we can work within. It's starting from a much lower place, so it'll take a lot longer to get there. But the corridors one is one that really stuck out to me because of really being part of the 8th Street redesign, the portion that did get done a few years ago, and knowing how many millions of dollars that took. And I think Commissioner Werner makes an excellent point. We can't make
private property developed, but that is the point of economic development and corridors, is to try and spur that on, to not have people sit on that property. But the reality that costs a lot of money. And so that's where we get into this budget prioritization, is we have a certain amount that goes into streets and repairs every year, just because that is our obligation as a city. But the way we've ever been able to make any kind of impact is through a lot of grants and a lot of public opportunities that aren't internal. And so to do that, we're gonna have to look at other creative sources. And that one, I remember 8th Street, there were a lot of different grants that we used that were kind of, it was very straightforward, but it's kind of like when we talk about the CDBG funding of like, yeah, this is going to help pave a parking lot, but that parking lot money that we're paying for is now money that can go into staffing that we're not allowed to fund. And so sometimes we have to be a little bit more creative and play with that. So I'm hoping that comes out in the budget process. But I think that does play a little bit into 3 and 4 too, though, of the reality is the way we budget now and all the infrastructure work we have to catch up on after a generation is we can't redo every street every time we touch one. And some of it is a repave or tear it down. Some of it's a repave, some of it's a resurface. We can't we have a lot of opportunities, and we're seeing that this summer on 9th, 10th, and in that area. But we have a lot of opportunities to improve, but we can't always restart. And I think sometimes when we have envisioning things like that out here and even wanting to move ahead on these goals, we can tend to try and make everything that we acknowledge as a repair into a total redo. And that might be part of the conversations we have to have coming forward. If that truly is how we have to get to where we are, then that might be something the public has to engage in and say, yeah, I'd rather you do 2 streets on 3 blocks a year and leave some potholes just temporarily filled and not resurfaced. Or we have to just be a little bit more realistic about what we can do when the projects are brought forward to us. But that's on us as commissioners and the decision-making body, where staff's kind of doing what's recommended by standard protocol of keeping our streets up and safe. Those are bigger conversations we're gonna have to have in the context of this kind of more envisioned. So I sound like I'm not hopeful. I'm hopeful on all of these. I think they're just really big conversations we're gonna have to have, and could be some major shifts in how we look at the budgeting going forward. So,
Thank you. Man, me.
So starting with the corridor topic, I think this is one that I want to hone in on because this also to me ties into our ability to work with other municipalities. Grand Traverse County is putting forward a corridor development plan, and that is touching the townships, it touches the city, and it is focusing on effective and efficient use of infrastructure and also protecting green spaces and areas by focusing development in these places where it is, relatively speaking, what we need to have in place, the sewer, the water, et cetera, is already there. And so limiting some sprawl. And so I think if there is a way to move that forward, it will be again, tying that into working collaboratively, because our corridors don't stop at city limits. They are crossing into Garfield Township. They are crossing, every single one of our corridors, it traverses into other municipalities. And so I think that's a really important thing to highlight and lift up, is that we have our corridor plan, master plan that's over a decade old, but this is currently happening. These are conversations that are going on, and making sure that the city is part of those and at that table, moving those forward. So I think that was the one that spoke to me. And then, with the people-centric street design, I'm glad that the Complete Streets is moving forward. We did get some good momentum on that. And I also think we also are recognizing the degree to which a lot of our streets don't actually fall under city jurisdiction. They are in our city, but that there are limited things. We've heard from the folks who live along Peninsula Drive and Eastern Ave about their frustrations with the crosswalks available there. And so I think there is some of this is also about greater communication around what we do and do not have direct oversight of.
Yeah, good comment. And it was, my final piece on this, so thank you for sharing those thoughts, is that these actions largely came from the community engagement, right? And they were framed to reflect the sort of tenor of what we heard from the community. And I think there's a sort of I wouldn't mind just some sort of general thoughts on how you think the approach should be on this when at a community level, most people are very local based, right? I mean, they're talking about my neighbourhood, there was a strong kind of narrative about neighbourhood or my street or my crossing or whatever, and what that looks like. And then yet at a city, you've got to have these larger sort of overarching, sort of master plans and so on, right? And I think my observation has been that that's part of the disconnect at the moment, is that people are very concerned about their locale and whether they don't feel that gets reflected in the sort of larger master plan sort of approach. But I do think that the sentiment that's beneath this is that somehow or other we have to think about how, as we talk about these topics, it's like there's different scales, right? And how do those scales connect together, which was a little about what you were just saying to talk about, right? But I think that's a very important thing. Any just general guidance on that, sort of like how we connect those pieces before we go to the next pillar?
I think that it's in pillar 2, isn't it, about neighborhood associations? I think that Deputy City Manager Deb Allen's program, the President's Club or whatever I think that that's a big step towards answering questions like that and giving this more global perspective to the neighborhoods of what we can and can't do. Yeah.
Okay, all right, good.
Maybe also, a reporting dashboard has been a part of this project from the beginning, and making that as accessible and communicating the results from that dashboard very broadly and frequently might be a way to help people say, oh, okay, my crosswalk didn't get done, but citywide there were 25 crosswalks that were upgraded, and mine will come along. So better reporting of progress might be helpful.
I actually really understand that, because we talk about these 10-year plans or corridor plans that were 2000. Most people aren't living in that kind of world, right? They're more interested in so I think something that people could track what's going on and see when it's coming to their door could be really interesting and useful.
And the only thing I would add too is I put a part of this on the commission itself. I'll say us for the assembled one today. And I've already seen improvements with this with staff through things like the Bay Brief and others, but communicating what we can and can't do ourselves as well. We, staff are the experts. They live in it every day. They're professionals, often certified professionals. A lot of us, I'm sure even our newer commissioners, are feeling like they've had a real education on government parlance and the alphabet soup we all use when we talk and everything else like that. But being better in our public meetings, like meetings are televised, we have social media for our city. We have to be better, I think, continue to be better. I think it's gotten better in the last couple of years of saying, not just here's what's presented and anybody looking at it would say, well, why isn't this here? Or why isn't my street on this? And saying, we're paying for this with a grant that only allowed this much space. Or we're doing this because it's the MDOT trunk line and the money only goes there. That's why 7th Street isn't being touched, or vice versa. So I think we just have to do a little bit better. I think continue to do better in communicating some of that to the public as we're introducing some of these topics, because a dashboard and everything are good, but if there's that missing important piece of where funding and or use of resources is coming from for a very good reason, the public should know that as well.
Okay. All right, thank you. Let's jump to the next pillar, right? So this was, Heather, as you started to introduce, this is about the placemaking and neighbourhood character. The objective of protecting the character of the downtown, the neighbourhoods. Here we have these 4 action areas, so experience-based approach to placemaking, elevating the power of the role of neighbourhood associations, intentionally creating gathering and social spaces, and then this enhanced multimedia connectivity between the neighbourhoods. You can see there on the scoring that there was nothing really on this one that jumped as a high priority in the community assessment. There were medium and low, but they're all relative, right? Because they're all on the list, so they're all on people's minds. You can see the progress, the subjective assessment on progress. If we go to the survey, this one was actually reasonably strong, right? I mean, they're not sort of over 5.5, but there's no real kind of weak points in this. But we do want to think about how we elevate the whole performance of this pillar and the actions that are in it. And shall we just dive into this? Tim, maybe we start with you this time. Go around from you, right?
Not to like beg off on the question, but I think when I took the survey, I even commented about the complete streets, because again, to me, it ties in here. At least number 8 is, multimodal connectivity. That's really what complete streets all about. We as a community with the space on 8th Street, it's a pilot. I think we still consider it as a test case, but that addresses number 7. So yes, we're making progress, and I think we've shown ourselves in the community that this is an area that we can be more deliberate about. And so on this one, I am more optimistic.
Okay. All right, great.
I think that this one, except for the Action 6 about neighborhood associations, which I think we're making progress on that one, all the rest of them, I think, go back to corridors and taking a look at what intentional corridors we want 11 years on with all the bikes and the increased density downtown, and that will help us discover new gathering places and the best ways to get Union Street goes to a golf course, Cass Street goes to South Airport, so maybe Cass Street is better up and down and for cars and that kind of thing. In the staff-generated summary here, it said that they've made a lot of substantial progress on bringing an experience-based approach to placemaking efforts. I think that East 8th Street I think that's been a success, but my hopes are definitely on the shoulders of the Complete Streets and the advisory board there to really bring true experience based approach to how we talk about mobility in town.
Yeah, there was a lot of interest that people talked about it in terms of there's one thing to have the spaces, but then how do you activate them, right? And how do you make them truly a neighbourhood centric or a local centric experience? So I think there's a sort of a subtext through a lot of this as well, is that push and pull in a tourism economy where you're having spaces that are for locals as well. So I think we talked about that. I think even some of our final sessions about some of these corridors really could be. Not the tourist centric, but they're more the local centric components. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I'd say the first and last 5 and 8 are some things that we can be in a better role as the city government from the top level to encourage throughout the city. Not that neighborhood associations and local gathering spaces aren't important, and they are, but if the idea is for those to be more organic and community driven, then a neighborhood might decide that its neighborhood association is primarily focused with the annual neighborhood barbecue and doesn't want to get into the same extent of conversations about planning and zoning that the neighborhood right across the street might be focused on. Similarly, yes, we can try to create more gathering spaces, but who is to say what that gathering space is and what how they fit into the broader community? Mm-hmm. Say a church can be a wonderful gathering space, but that's not a place for government to step in, nor is that a space that would be inclusive of people that aren't members of that faith community. A preschool childcare center can be a great place for connecting of young parents and very necessary in parts of town that have many young parents, but the people that don't have young parents aren't connected through that social program.
Okay, thank you.
I would join in Heather saying I'm really happy with the progress that we're seeing with the neighborhood associations and making that more centralized for communication. I didn't mention it last time, but overall, I'm also excited for the city commission to get the Complete Streets ad hoc recommendations and start working on that to start solidifying some of that for policy. What I'm seeing though, like we've talked about the social district on 8th Street, that's been mentioned a couple times here. That was initiated by the businesses there. And while it's kind of not where I think most people in Traverse City would think of where people want to go hang out, and it's probably a more local thing, I do see a lot of my Traverse Heights neighbors there, but I also see a lot of people who are visiting, especially from different countries, because they like the feel of the sitting outside and communal atmosphere there. So I say that to say that I don't think any corridor that we design will inherently stay local, because I think any kind of gatherings bring people around. But I think that is where budget-wise, we could put more into this, because look at what we did for, $35,000, I think it was, or $60,000. It wasn't a huge lift for a social district, and created a great gathering space. But I think that when we look at the fact we don't have like a parks department programming, and we don't, the social districts and things are really run by the local businesses, kind of like what Tim was talking about, activating. I think that's an opportunity for us to do some more with budgeting, but I think it's also an opportunity for the community to have more stake in what they want to see in their neighborhoods and the community itself, because a lot of that is privately based, or a certain amount of initiative to draw attention to certain spaces within their area where we just don't, we don't have a kickball league happening at F&M Park, for example, or something. So that's where the activating that space is really going to be something where I think the community is going to have a real good chance to engage with us, or the body, I should say, and staff on creating new opportunities. So I think this one's a kind of a low-hanging fruit, actually budget-wise, but it's also a bigger lift on the community as opposed to our staff and ourselves.
Yeah, but it is that opportunity to empower the community and really create that partnership. I think one of the other sort of overlays in all of this is that there's been a real intention, I think, in the planning and the outreach to build more trust and communication between the city and the community. These type of things could be really practical, and as you say, could be fairly low cost ways to strengthen that partnership so that there's a more collaboration. Me.
So following up on what the mayor was discussing, thinking about, for instance, the social district and how that emerged from local business owners, across all of these categories, I'm seeing an opportunity for the city to have clearer channels for groups of business owners, a neighborhood association, whatever the entity is, to bring forward an idea and to have some potentially to have some pot of money, some funding in the budget allocated for. We had talked about in one of the design groups, we called it originally was called tactical urbanism, and so these very low cost experiments in activating public spaces. And so I being willing to try some things to see. So your neighborhood association is saying you want to activate this, this piece of property. Maybe you want a pocket park. What can we do for, $5,000 or less? Or maybe it's $1,500 or less. And and to be able to have some sort of proof of concept, as we are seeing with the piloting of the social district on 8th Street. So I think but having those channels be defined in a way that they aren't currently. I think it's very opaque to people for we want to do this thing. Where do we start? Who do we talk to? And if that can be advanced, then that would be we would be able to make some more progress on these pillars.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, right. Thank you.
There's been conversation now, a couple of folks have mentioned the social district, and I believe the social district made use of economic development funding, and it was essentially an economic development proposition, and I'm sure there are ways to whether it's gathering data on foot traffic or something that would help us to evaluate how effective that was as an economic development tool. What I would like to see, and what I think this pillar is saying to me, is that not everything needs to be framed in terms of economic development. that this is an opportunity to shift our perspective to quality of life, and specifically quality of life for residents. So I believe, the idea of coming to a neighborhood association and saying, we've got this pot of funds, what would benefit you the most? What would most improve your quality of life? And it will vary from neighborhood to neighborhood, depending upon the profile of the residents who are there. But for us to give equal weight to quality of life and economic development, I think is a really important attitude shift among leadership.
I just interrupt to say kudos on that, because that is something I think has been quietly happening at the commission level of how our policy is, but I appreciate you really articulating that really clearly, that I think everybody felt like things had to be wedged for many decades, even had to be wedged into economic development or some kind of stimulus for tax base or something to do it. And I really appreciate, sorry, I just had to jump in and say I really appreciate that you kind of are pointing out that shift in perspective that's been there but not articulated so well. So thank you.
And if I can add to that too, because it does come up later in the data, is that because you're such a strong visitation economy, the economic development's often coupled to the visitation economy, which is a double rub for people, right, when you talk about quality of life. So that'll come up a bit later on as well, but I think that's a really powerful point.
And if I can say, the visitation community, the tourists, that's not quality of life. That's not for the people who live here. You build a place where people love to live there. They have great services. They have enough. They have what they need, whether that's trails or green space, and then you have economic development. That's what makes economic development for the people who live here. Economic development for tourism is a completely different thing.
Yeah, and we're going to visit that in sustainable tourism. I do think that was another one of those overlay issues, is that I think there's a lot of appetite to explore the whole notion of sustainable tourism, which is re-pivoting actually the economics around visitation economy, right? This is great. Benjamin, do you think we're getting what we need for our next steps?
I do, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, this is great. I appreciate the conversation.
All right, so let's go to, so everybody waited on that, didn't they? Yep. So let's go to the next one. Kind of different topic here, right? So this regional collaborative approach, how do we think about managing resources, utilities, climate adaptation, and leading on key issues? Ties into some of the things we're starting to talk about in terms of regional corridors and so on. This was something that I think surfaced through the strategic planning, and I actually came up in the very first session, the think tank session, and there was this talk about that Traverse City needs to provide, more leadership, right? And I guess we asked the question: does Traverse City have to step up and provide leadership, or does it join other groups? And I tested that all through the strategic planning process, because I knew it would have implications for how you operate as a group of commissioners, but also the staff. And at least what I heard overwhelmingly were people saying, well, it needs to happen. In a lot of cases, Traverse City, the city of Traverse City might be the one that has to lead and initiate on this. So let's dive into this, right? So talking about fostering this regional collaborative approach, we can see there is a series of sort of actions that were identified. The prioritisation given by the community, so the highest one was around the potential for shared government services, but not really anything much happening at the level of current progress was the subjective judgment. So, I think that reflects the reality, is that you obviously have been focused on your city, and that's what your job is as a set of commissioners. But I think the question's being asked about, well, do we take a bigger approach? So when we ask the question about the alignment between that fostering a regional collaborative approach, you can see that these scored really lowly, right? And that, I think, is reflective of the lack of current progress there, which is all limited by the subjective judgment. This one here, I think, is a really interesting, and it's kind of like a real behavioural shift for commissioners, staff, and it's going to require, if you go down this path, it requires the investment of time. You've got to build some equity. You're going to be having to deal with trade-offs. There's all that goes into this. Would love to kind of get your take on this in terms of, how important, how we tackle this. What do you think it looks like in terms of closing the gap on alignment? Maybe Heather, we could start with you.
Yeah, this is a tough one. Well, in this staff-generated, summary critique, right at the top it says there is no currently there is it's incorrectly worded. There is no current regional collaboration map.
Yeah.
I'm quoting.
Yeah.
There's Networks North, or is that what it's called? Networks Northwest. I can't see anything in there as just a normal person. There's nothing I can see. I don't know what the mobility planning organization is either. I don't know what, I think that this, even though it's kind of a low priority from the residents, I think this is a really huge priority I think it is a big, and I was happy to hear Mai talk about the Grand Traverse County putting together the future corridor development plan. I think that's something that we need to be at least in the room for that. Maybe the County Board of Public Works is a place to start where we're all talking. The Michigan Township Association, which I attend, is really all presentation focused. So there's some networking that goes on. We chat a little bit, but really it's all about, we have a presentation and then we go home. So we're not talking to one another. I think that the city needs representation on the Airport Authority Board. Mm-hmm. We are not there, and it's right in it's not even our backyard, it's like our living room. As far as exploring potential for shared government services, I don't know what to say about that either. I mean, sure, what do those look like? We actually unshared last year. We broke our IT off, so. And as create a leadership team to advocate for the region. I actually think Traverse Connect does a good job with this, and we don't need to spend it. We're already paying them to do it, and I think they're doing a good job. They are actually advocating for people to come and live here and work here and build businesses here. It's not Traverse City tourism. That's not what they're working on, so I think we're okay there. But I don't know, we need something, but I don't know what it is for the regional. We need a regional planning advisory board, but I don't know what that looks like.
Yeah. All right, well, let's keep digging into that, right?
Echoing what Heather just said, the last point I'd say is better served through Traverse Connect as a body than creating an additional structure. If we had some leadership team that was not under the auspices of an organization like Traverse Connect, I can see it becoming very fraught with different representatives from different municipalities then trying to fight for something that benefits their specific municipality or what they think their voters want, rather than the goal of having a regional and collaborative approach. For shared government services, that would be very nice if we could, but that's ultimately dependent on how willing various community partners are willing to play with each other. Like, yes, as Heather just said, we separated our IT, but also we decided to start having ambulance service handled by Traverse City Fire, which, yes, that is government providing better service for residents, but MMR had been, and still is, an ambulance service that does cover multiple municipalities. And therefore it had been a shared service in that sense. We do need to have more conversations about how the city and county can work together, but I'm not even sure how many opportunities, aside from there being mutual aid from fire and police, to have joint services with the city and the surrounding townships.
Okay.
But I would say that 10 really needs more effort put into it, because there can be conversations that various organizations, various levels of government have some role in it, but it can be difficult to see the whole big picture. Take, for example, what the city is going to be doing with the Carnegie building. There we have a tenant, the Crooked Tree Art Center, that wants to continue being in this area. We have the library that was thinking they have a plan for the future use of that space. But so we can decide what we want to do as a city, but then there's two people, two other organizations that aren't always in the same room as us, and the broader picture of, okay, if we want to have an art center here, if we want to have a museum or a history interpretive site here, that isn't necessarily fixed to that one location. There could be other locations, both within and outside the city. Like, look at our neighbor right next door. NMC has a property on Boardman Lake, which is outside the city, that they are not using as much. It has a lot of vacant, or in future terms, soon to be vacant area that either of those entities, a museum history center could be part of that space, an art center could be part of that space. But if we don't have the conversations where multiple organizations are actively talking to each other, we don't see what the opportunities are and what will work best for everyone.
So I think that's great, right? And I just want to kind of recenter us too on what I think this pillar was about, right? And to a degree, it is kind of working out those solutions, right? Like, we've got this space, and that's the collaboration piece. But I think this pillar was really reflecting this sort of unease that people had about a lot of the city of Traverse City's future is being strongly influenced by the 85,000 people who live in the region but don't live in the city, right? And I think that was the sort of, your population's relatively small, but you own the brand, right? And all roads lead. And so I think that was really what people were kind of pushing on in the strategic planning, the sense of how do we kind of bring people together to guide a future. Sure, it's in our self-interest, right? But how do we bring people together to collaborate? And, it's thinking about resources and things like that. But I think that underneath this, right, what this pillar is about how do you kind of build that heft or that collaboration to be able to make good choices together, not be inadvertently competing or have kind of different kind of directions by different entities. But that was I just wanted to kind of recenter on that. So
Yeah, and so I look at this and see kind of from where the angle of the pillars coming from, which seems very 20,000 foot and very encompassing.
Yeah.
And what I've noticed over the years, the example I'll give is we were talking about affordable housing, as we always do, as we should. And I had asked, can everybody get together and just put together a list of what affordable housing projects are coming online, due to come online, started, blah, blah, blah. How does that not exist? Should we be funding that? And I was told, well, oh yeah, the planners get together and talk about that. And so they have that list. And now I think what we've seen in the last couple of years, this was probably 6 or 7 years ago, Housing North is kind of stepping into that role, much like Traverse Connect has stepped into some of these roles. And so I think, in the last couple of years, there's been improvements in finding these kind of brokers, if you will, to bring everybody together. We can go back 10, 15 years of Traverse City sitting at the podium or at the dais in our space saying, well, everybody should come talk to us about housing, arms crossed and waiting for everybody to come to us. And that's and as was touched on by Heather and others, like no one government agency is going to bring everybody else together because it's a push and pull of interest. And so you always need that kind of mediator or convener of the conversations, where I think also we have a lot of opportunity that we've seen in very, very recent times are things like our Housing and Homelessness Task Force or the QRT, where these are very specified topics that are bringing people together to work on the solutions and getting the right parties at the table. And so I think it'd be great if we had a master list of everybody who's doing everything in the community relating to different issues, but that's just not a realistic use of our resources or funds. But I think looking for more of the gatherers like Traverse Connect, like Housing North, having everybody work together to refine those to be more of what we're looking for our data collection, and then convening the task force with the experts to share the data that might already be shared, because this is where I think the commission's more like the citizens as we're supposed to be. We're not here in the offices every day. We're not in staff meetings, and we're not in a lot of the other types of meetings that happen as part of people's day-to-day work. And so there's information gathering there that does eventually come through when we're presented with a policy, or we convene a task force and we know who to ask, or we're getting updates on this or that. But a lot of people are working on that a lot in day to day. And that's just something that we can do better when it's on relevant tasks or relevant information. But I think at some point, people are doing this 40 hours a day, and we have how many 100 plus staff people? I think it would be impossible for us to distill down everybody that they're talking to all the time and working with. But how do we do it on the relevant matters and convey that better? Again, communicate better who's there. And I think we've done that well with the housing task force, of the list of partners who are there, having them give updates, things like that, and seeing that more maybe as we're seeing some of these more refined or specified issues that are part of larger topics that we're tackling on a case-by-case basis.
So do you think then at the level of sort of budget and programming that to move the needle on this is really, as commissioners, that you're empowering your staff and manager to be at the table on these institutional groups? Or
Yeah, absolutely. And then, maybe there starts to be a budget, just the way that things are going, a budget line item for task force, because those will ultimately cost extra time and money and maybe an extra resource. And we've figured out ways to fund that in the past, such as our social workers and such. So, I'm being somewhat flippant by saying a line item, but that might be how that gets conveyed in the budget, because we also know our staff time is valuable, and you can't add, straws that break camels' backs. We definitely don't want to break the camels. So,
please.
Well, so I would just want to concur with the comments that have been made about Traverse Connect being very effective as an advocate for our region. When talking about some of the things that are going on at the county level, like for instance, the corridor improvement plan, whomever is appointed from the next city commission to sit on the Economic Development Corporation will be part of that conversation. And so to your point, committing as the city leadership that it is vital to be at those tables and to be in those rooms, talking about convening organizations to identify needs and solutions. The Grand Traverse Regional Community Foundation and Rotary Charities frequently have those kinds of events that are and just community-based networking, show up, have a cup of coffee, have a conversation, find out what's going on. So understanding that there are, in any given day, 100 different priorities that are coming across the desk of our city's leadership, knowing when those are occurring and committing to attending those and to be an accessible face for the city, I think will help move the needle. And to the mayor's point, if there is some kind of a line item that emphasizes that commitment, that's wonderful. But I think more globally, the understanding that the need to actually go and be in the room, even when the city isn't the entity that is calling the meeting, having a little humility about that.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you.
I am drawn to number 12 about creating a leadership team to advocate for the region. While I admire Traverse Connect's efforts for things like bringing new residents to the area, the scope and scale of what they're able to accomplish is not enough to really move the needle. The latest program, I think, is funded with $50,000, which allows them to compensate 10 families or units to move to a 10-county area and commit to staying there for 1 year. And so that really isn't gonna, I think have a big impact on what our employment picture looks like. I'm afraid that there's a mismatch between the size of the issue and the resources against it. I admire what was done with the use of NGOs for the homelessness situation. They're acting as conveners. I have had a long-term positive view of Networks Northwest, just because they are a source of impartial data, and whether they could help us to convene a group region-wide remains to be seen, but they are Switzerland You know, they're not, you know, pro anybody. They are there with the facts, and I respect that. But I think that there are issues that could really impact and benefit every government entity in our area. Things like the lodging tax. You know, what state law restricts how lodging taxes are allocated, and it isn't funneled toward infrastructure or, you know, other costs to the locality of hosting these. You know, that to me might be an issue that we could come together around, something that will benefit every entity in the area. Has, I think, some upside. So.
Yeah. Okay, great, thank you. And I think that's sort of getting to what I heard the community talking about. You know, like you, a bit hard to put your finger on it exactly, right? But this sort of sense of we've got to have some heft, right? Our voice has got to be heard. We can't just get lost at the level of per capita population, right? There are issues here that we need other people to act on, and we might need some more influence. So, Tim?
Yeah, excellent comments all around. I guess from a high level, what I see here is, and Mitch touched on this, like we've removed ourselves from some collaboration. We're working toward collaboration, and there's a lot of collaboration ongoing. So what would be helpful, maybe it's what you were able to overhear, David, throughout the process, or maybe it's in the raw data, is fostering a regional collaborative approach for what? Like, let's be more specific and understand, and then as a body say, like we probably have a consensus, housing and homelessness, regional heft is another one, but are there other ones that rise to the top and there's consensus around? Because I think we might get stuck spinning our wheels if we just talk about regional collaborative approach writ large, which is good, but we could spin our wheels for a long time. Whereas if we're talking about housing and homelessness, there's efforts going, we could build on that. If it's regional heft, try to pick maybe the top, I'll make it up, top 3 specific things to try to collaborate on and build some momentum there. And then maybe in years to come, there'll be a 4th, 5th, and 6th.
Yeah, good comment. I'll go back through the data, but top of mind, the ones that I heard people talking about were housing and homelessness was one. I think climate adaptation was another one, and you'll see that actually about like a regional climate plan. And I think that the impact of the transient lodging tax and tourism is another one, right? Because I think that people sort of, you know, you go through Detroit Airport and it goes, go to Traverse City, and right, people in Traverse City go, we've got enough, right? So there's a kind of disconnect there, and I think they were the 3 at least that we heard a lot about. And I think we could sharpen this, Benjamin, as we go through into the next step by picking those out, because it is kind of like it's more like a conceptual approach rather than a set of clear kind of action steps. All right, so let's jump to the next one. So creating a complete community. So this was one that we had we changed it right at the end, the name, we flipped it, didn't we? Because this was about building socioeconomic systems. And I think, Heather, you actually proposed that.
Too wordy, too many jargony words.
Yeah, and that's a little bit of the sort of feedback we got at the very final session, right? And I actually think this makes a lot more sense to people, right? In terms of the action areas, this was a really interesting one, right? So this actually scored lower as a pillar, but we think, we had that conversation, we thought it might be a bit, the name of it was sort of a bit misleading for people. But the community priority areas here, big support on encourage more full-time residents living in the core neighbourhoods. That's like the primary kind of core. That was a really strong issue for people, this sense of how do we combat the nation, or the trend towards being sort of like seasonal houses in these sort of high value areas. And then the childcare capacity, which was, I think, the highest rated priority and the second highest rated priority. And you can see there on the current progress on the city side, these areas that I think there's some significant opportunity for, you know, thinking about new programming and budget allocations to reflect what the community's pointing to as priorities there. So in terms of the survey results, you can see these are really what I'd call degraded, right? I mean, we don't have much alignment at all. In fact, the boosting the childcare capacity, is just we're clearly in the realm of not at all aligned, right? So I think this one is an area where there's an interesting opportunity, and I think it ties to what you were saying too, Jackie, earlier about the quality of life component, right? So let's have a crack at this one, right? So we've got some, 4 sort of actions areas. There might be, these are just actions that the community identified. I think these are going to morph a little, but this whole idea about how do we make those main neighbourhood areas like truly livable, vibrant with people living there and so on. This idea of showcasing best practice solutions, promoting equity, and then this childcare capacity, which is obviously a sort of key issue for people. So, Mitch, do you want to take us around this one?
Childcare is something that we've heard a lot about, but the city hasn't really stepped into. The county did for a period, but it is something that is needed, and it does tie into the fact that we do have a lot of people that commute into this Traverse City without living here, in part because both housing is expensive and childcare is limited here. So that could potentially tie back to the top 13 if we have better childcare opportunities in Traverse City. Then more of those people can feel that they have a home where their young family can be.
Yeah, thank you.
So a couple on this. One is childcare. We did actually used to do a summer camp, and I think that would be a low-hanging fruit we could even do this year for next year, obviously. That there's a template. I know United Way reached out to me and I think some others.
Who, I'm sorry?
United Way, a couple of months ago, because they are working on trying to both boost and bolster the use of TriShare in this community, but also to just finding these summer solutions. There's a lot of larger organizations that are trusted, like the YMCA and NMC, that offer summer programming that are out there. And there's even a group right now exploring a millage for childcare. So there's literally going to be an opportunity, very likely in the next year to 3 years, for the people of Traverse City and Grand Traverse County to put their money where their mouth is. And it's relatively affordable proposition from what the numbers are coming out, but there's a lot more work being done on that. And then that would be the look of, is that investing in programs and allowing them to expand? Because we do know that even with a few years ago, the city got rid of, I think, pretty much every restriction we had locally on childcare and just defaulted to the states. But the state still has quite a bit, and rightfully so. We want children to be safe, obviously. But working are there places where that can be relaxed a little? Getting the startup can be very difficult. There's some talks about relaxing the laws on a micro scale so that rather than just being in somebody's house, somebody could do it in a smaller building or space. So there are conversations happening around this. It's money and it's time and it's policy, and there's the right combination of forces coming together. So again, I think the city bringing back summer camp with some of these other interested parties potentially is something we could really have explored and probably not be a huge lift. But I would also say that in my day job, if you will, I'm actually working on a 3-year grant with a team of 4 on the governor's 60 by 30 initiative. And that is the governor's plan to have every Michigander, or 60% of Michiganders of college eligible age, have either a degree or certification. And the idea behind this is raising the middle class. And so getting businesses to invest in trainings and certifications and education for their employees, getting people who kind of fell off the wagon or didn't continue into education to take advantage of a lot of the programs that are out there through the state right now. And I say this as there's a lot going on in a lot of our communities that are touching on in our community already that are touching on some of these things, because we know to live here, you have to have a decent paying job in the city, or we have to, it's part of our housing conversation too. The childcare issue isn't going to be solved by the city alone, but there are little things we can do, and there's other people out there that we can partner with to try and elevate that conversation. And the social equity and people living in the core neighborhoods, those are people who are the social equity, especially. I think we have a lot of good nonprofits in our community doing that work, and we just need to continue to support them, support initiatives when they come to us, whether it's using the open space or asking for proclamation. Those little things we do make a difference to the bigger work that's being done by others in the community. And the residents in the core, that's a cost issue that we've all been struggling and working with, because, I think there was a little bit of a criticism of David saying the visitation community versus tourism, but I think we also have residents who live here 5 months of the year or 4 months of the year that are people's neighbors that they see and they talk to and they come to their neighborhood, block party, but they're not full-time residents here. And so that is that difference of the people that are engaging and going to our schools and part of our economy. And so a lot of this is, again, those regional partners where we have to have some of those bigger conversations, but there are this one I feel like has a couple very tangible things that the city could do with our budget and align with priorities better.
Yeah. Can I ask you, do you think there's appetite to, because I personally think to encourage more full-time residents living in the core neighbourhoods. I understand the sentiment, right, that people talk about. Tough one to track because you're really dealing with people's individual rights and property rights, all that sort of stuff. Do you think there's appetite to push in on that think about what innovative approaches there could be? Or
I think so, and I think it also is something that my understanding right now, unless something's changed, is if you're a non-homestead resident, you pay more in tax, but that all goes to TCAPS, the school district, which is good. We want to support our schools, but we can't, as a city, exercise a non-resident tax. And so, are there things like that we, again, regionally with our partners like Traverse Connect or something, can advocate for, as well as getting creative with any changes in the law? Lauren, are you nodding your head? Yes or no? I'm sorry.
I mean, it's something we could explore. Right?
Okay.
There are different ways. There are different things that we could explore, but that's a really tricky one to.
Yeah. And so I think we have staff that can get very creative, and we have officials and community members who are very creative, but we also have Lansing. So that limits us sometimes.
Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you. Please.
So I know that of these, the boosting childcare capacity had a huge amount of critical mass to it. And I'm going back to your point about micro centers. Until or unless the state makes changes at that level, I think there is something to be said about encouraging full-time residents and boosting childcare through encouraging home-based care. And if there are, in helping to, if there are still barriers with the density of home-based center or other issues around zoning, to be able to address that, but if there are ways to incentivize with developments, if we are offering a pilot for a development, is there a way to say to the developer and, to really get to maximize what we're willing to offer you for a pilot, we would want you to incentivize a unit for a home-based childcare center. This is something that I've heard from folks who work in the industry, that they would love to see this happening, because where do we need more childcare centers? In multifamily. That makes a lot of sense to have it in a multifamily development. So I think that there is a way to connect those two things together and to move momentum on both of them.
Yeah, and it's not then the city necessarily doing it, but you're providing the enabling mechanisms.
Correct.
Yeah. Got it. Thank you.
So left to my own devices, this was my number one pillar.
Okay.
And because I think that a community of full-time residents has advantages in terms of quality of life that a hollowed out community of part-time or short-term residents or transitory residents may not. So I am very interested in exploring what kind of tools might be available to us to encourage full-time residents. I also am sensitive to the fact that we're hearing anecdotal reports of professionals, doctors at Munson who turned down jobs because they couldn't afford housing. Well, yes, housing prices are high. Are salaries high enough? So I think that exploring pay scales in Traverse City and making discrepancies between Grand Traverse County and downstate counties and markets perhaps a little more visible. If we have a bully pulpit, that might be a place to use it. I am absolutely in favor of promoting TRICARE wherever we can. The summer camps, definitely. Looking for ways to encourage, whether through skill building or financing, more childcare locations. And I'm not sure what that would take, but the lack of full-time residents has this knock-on effect on our school systems and our retailers and it just makes this strong seasonality of our economy even worse.
Yeah.
And so I see this as just a real urgent issue for the quality of life overall.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, in the very early meetings, I thought this concept came out of the original thoughts about, there were a lot of talk about climate change and well-off people in other parts of the country decide, hey, Traverse City looks good, let's move there. I can bring my business, work remotely, whatever it might be. And so a lot of the discussion was well-off people they are coming here and it will just accelerate. And so how do we stay a balanced community? And that gets to some of all these words that Heather referred to that get piled into there. But I think on a simple or oversimplified basis, it was, let's remain a diverse community and not just an Aspen type of community in the future. And so it will take hard work and there aren't easy answers. But I think a role that the city could play better is as a clearinghouse to help current residents understand what is available as far as assistance. Like there's a USDA Section 504 program with significant amounts of money. Like I'm going to ignore the current state of the federal government, but there has been, and when I spoke to somebody there several months ago, it was still in existence. But there's very low interest loans available there, and I believe the age was 60 and above, you can get a $10,000 grant even. So that's just an example. And then there's, Traverse City Light and Power with on-bill financing. So there's a lot of programs in existence that I would guess a large majority of our residents just aren't aware of. And it's not that part of it's marketing and packaging, because this exists for everybody. It's not like, oh, here's they're not handouts, like, oh, here's a handout somehow. These exist for all of us, for our community. And we as a city could maybe do a better job of, I say clearinghouse, I don't know what the right words are, but just helping to get the word out, spread the word, maybe even help people fill out the paperwork somehow. That's staffing, et cetera. But maybe there is a way to leverage what currently exists.
Yeah, interesting comment. And just my personal opinion, so ignore it if you choose, right, is that I do think that pressure for you as a location, to me, it gives you about a 5-year window, right? Your community character is going to get shaped dramatically by who comes here and what radar you get on, right? And so you do have a window, and you perhaps have the bully pulpit and things like that to be able to create expectations of, if people move here or are looking to move here, what does that come with it as a responsibility to be part of the community? I mean, there's perhaps a whole range of creative things you could think about, but I do think that maintaining the sense of you being a functioning community, like a complete community, I do, and that's one that's kind of easy to kind of push off into the future, because it's not a pothole on the road, and it's more a trajectory. But I do think that's one, as commissioners, to really keep an eye on, because the character of your community could change, and that's what that prioritisation. That's what I think the community was saying in that high priority there about that. It might be a sort of simplistic approach, just like let's find a way to stack more people in our kind of core neighbourhoods. But what they're really reflecting, I think, is a concern about the loss of community. Heather?
I think that Commissioner Werner had a great point about some kind of public service workshops about, grants. Maybe you could fold in like the ADU, plan thing. So we have some kind of ongoing public service workshop-y thing. It needs to be budgeted, of course. I think that, to your point, David, preserving what we already have that people really like about this place, our trees, our access to recreation, safe streets, great variety in culture, good schools, all of those things, just work hard to make those things keep working like they are now. We do have a wage problem, and maybe that needs some soft power behind it, that we talk about it more. If people can't afford here, people that we actually need to be living here, then, and we want people to be able to maybe have a rental, and then they have a starter home, that kind of thing. And those options are pretty limited right now. I keep an eagle eye on people who are claiming homestead status and maybe aren't really homesteaders. I've been told that actually does happen, that the eagle eye is there. And affordable housing for the service people who work in our restaurants, who, most of the action takes place in the summertime, and then people get laid off. Our businesses try really hard to keep those people on throughout the winter, but it means that their bottom line is extremely thin, trying to keep their staff around. And it doesn't help that our rents are so high. So anything we can do to help with that. As far as the childcare section, I think that as far as zoning is concerned, we've done everything we can to make it easy to have childcare. But I thought my Commissioner Stanley's idea about incentives for home-based care was a great idea. That's a really good idea. So maybe we can do something about that. Maybe that's part of this service workshop program, or every month it's about something else. That's all I got.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. 2 to go, right? So supporting environmental sustainability. So this is that kind of bigger question about how we adapt to this changing world, maintain a thriving ecosystem. Few kind of really interesting actions rose to the surface here, right? So this idea of a sustainability plan that focuses on climate mitigation adaptation, research to replicate best practice sustainability measures, embed environmental education, visit interface, explore new visitation economy funding for sustainability measures. So this will also kind of collapse over a little bit actually into the year-round economy, which is the last pillar. You can see here there was a bunch of high priority areas for the community in this. So a number of the actions really jumped up. And the one where there was seen to be some progress was around the developing the sustainability plan. Clearly a deep value in this community. I mean, that just runs through the core of it. But if we look at the data on where we think we're doing in terms of alignment of budgets and programs, 1 being not at all aligned, 10 being very well aligned, you can see the numbers are not your best scorecard, right? So, and this is your assessment of that. So there were areas here, obviously, where you saw that there's obviously a lot of potential, but there's also a lack of alignment. So, Mayor, do you want to take us away on this?
Sure. Well, the first thing is I absolutely agree that a plan of some kind. We did a climate action plan at Traverse City Light and Power that, is different from what we're talking about, but not where I think this is where we get into in a lot of discussions in the city commission level over the years where we hire, I just would say as a whole, of the people that have been hired pretty much since I started 10 years ago, people know what they're getting into with Traverse City. They know that we're an environmentally focused community. They know that we're a community that tries to have some progressive values on things like this. And so that is where a lot of people our staff is starting from. And then there is a standard that varies from elected body to elected body. I think I've served with 8 over the last 10 years, or 7 or 8. Anyways, as well as what that means to each person individually. And that's good. It keeps us at a high standard, because I think that is something that gets lost, is Traverse City has a pretty high standard for the state. If you travel around and talk to people, we are known and noted for the work we're doing. That's not a laurel we should sit on. That's something we should continuously improve and push. But it also means that it becomes very subjective when we're having, especially policy discussions, of what that means to different people. And we've heard it argued about how we use the word sustainability, how we use, some of the more common accepted vernacular, and it's all very fair conversation or critiques and conversations that need to be had. But I think having some kind of an overarching plan with input that then at least everybody who knows that when something comes to us from staff or something comes to us from an initiative, it's coming from that base, right? I think that's something we have to do better on everything in our community sometimes with our conversations. We get questions sometimes of, is this legal? Well, nothing comes to us that hasn't been checked by our attorney. Similarly, let's have something that reassures people that minimally we've looked at these things. Now, the body, the public then can debate can we do it better? How do we budget for it to be better? But knowing that there's these underpinnings of everything coming out of staff, that there's this agreed upon sentiment of this is what we mean when we say we're bringing forth a policy that we feel meets our standards environmentally as a community and as a city. I think that that's an important baseline, because otherwise it's going to be throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks, and arrows that or darts that may or may not hit the target, depending on who's sitting in those 7 seats. And that's not the best way for us to be effective and to get to the goals that we want to get to. So that to me is the very number one. The tourism or the visitation economy and the tourism, we know people come here for that. We had this conversation, I think, right here actually, but in the other room, about what does that mean. And I think that ultimately, again, is a lot of private industry, but what can we do locally and explore that isn't, I wouldn't say, punitive, but what can we do to really encourage our businesses through incentives, through conversations, through public pressure to be more sustainable and how they practice and what they do. So I think the other 3, the first 3 there, 17, 18, and 19, kind of all fall under us having a better baseline that we're starting from, because I think that's where some of the distrust is we have very active, engaged environmentalists in this community. And so, I think anything any commission could do might never meet a high standard for that group of people. And that's why it's great to have them in our community, because they keep us pushing. But let's at least have a baseline that people know we're starting from.
So can I dig into that just a little, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, because you were right, you said at the start that people, when they come here, they know what they're getting into, right? This is a value that the community shares, right? But this data is your data and the candidates, right? And does that say that you don't feel like you're walking the talk? Is that? Well,
that's where I question. I think I rated this one higher than most people, because I looked at it through the lens, again, of we're talking about, to me, to this stuff, we're talking about the disposable or the discretionary funding that we have in our budget, because we have a lot of obligations, and where we think that, and I think that gets into, we've talked about it in a couple of different arenas of where people think that our staff is starting from. And so I think that comes down to communication, but I think that's where having something fundamental that we know is the baseline helps everybody gain that trust, that maybe because somebody might have had more conversations with our engineer or our clerk, or someone knows where they're at, unless you have that personal interaction, it becomes a they, right? It becomes an otherness.
Okay.
And so trying to eliminate some of that otherness to say, listen, we know we're all starting here. We know if you're applying for a job here, this is what you're buying into. That was just for work, by the way, not the community, or for the staff, not just the community in general. We know that we want to do more with our budget in this way, but what does that look like? Because right now it's a project by project, throwing a dart at it, or having a fight about a sidewalk that's maybe relevant, but then are we missing other things because we're getting focused on these projects that are being brought forward that we're not doing enough with stormwater, which we know is something we're not doing enough with. And so let's have this bigger conversation. So there's this bigger underpinning that really, that's why this is one of the pillars for the budget, right? Is we know that on the small scale and on the large scale of things like stormwater, we need to do more. But what does that look and sound like? That it isn't just arbitrary every year, depending on who's 7 people are sitting up there passing a budget.
Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah, I think it's, that data also, the way the actions were developed, I think it's, you're talking about staff coming here, knowing what they're buying into, but people are also saying they want visitors to come and be part of the solution. So thank you. Please.
So in terms of budget, I would say we perhaps have been not as well aligned, but I think programmatically, or at least in terms of focus, there has been a lot of effort on this around, we've had two stormwater ad hocs that have been very active, and and again, I think a lot of this comes down to what where we can use our, for lack of a better word, social capital to press some levers to get others to take action versus what we have the capacity to mandate. The original stormwater ad hoc, we had the discussion that we couldn't have a utility because that would be considered a tax, and things of that nature. But I think that it's also, every year we have the discussion about how much road salt we use. And, there's been a 50% reduction, and every year we talk about reducing that further. So this is a focus, and I also agree that having some very concrete sort of baseline, a 50% reduction, that's wonderful. Like where are we at? What is our target? If we're talking about getting to carbon neutrality, where are we on that? If there's a dashboard around that. So perhaps in terms of actual budget allocations, hasn't been well aligned, but there is work and has been work happening here. And this is, as to your point, Mayor, something that in the city of Traverse City, there is a baseline, sort of expectation around this. And so continuing to have those conversations, but get very concrete about what are the areas where we can actually do something as a city. That where are the places where we can have some mandates and some change some policies, and then where are the ways we need to act more regionally to use some of those social pressures.
Very clear. Thank you.
It seems to me that this is the ideal issue for regional collaboration. We are 8.2 square miles or whatever it is, and surrounded by a much larger area that, we need to do this together. And it seems to me that this would reach the threshold of benefiting everyone. Everyone would have skin in the game. Everyone would experience benefits. And, perhaps if we are ahead of some of the other local government entities in our actions in this area, that maybe we can act as a convener, or that we can leverage input from local water and environmental NGOs that have been doing quiet work for a long time, and to partner with them more effectively.
Okay. Thank you. Tim?
Yeah, there's two categories here in my mind, and they do overlap from time to time and on certain topics, but there's essentially water quality is one of our big things in Traverse City, and there were a lot of discussions during development of the strategic plan, but also the climate crisis is another big topic. And again, there is a Venn diagram where some things overlap, certainly trees, stormwater, intensity of events, things like that, invasive species. On the stormwater side, though, we as a city commission, I thought we did an excellent job of starting the conversation about microplastics, with West End Beach, and saying, hey, we don't want plastic netting buried there that just degrades and ends up in the bay. So there's topics like that their policy, they won't take much as far as budget, but we could say, citywide, for the city itself, we don't want to be using these materials sort of thing and adding to the microplastics problem, just as an example. But certainly stormwater, as we all know, for the many years that it's been addressed, that is a serious budgetary concern, and then sanitary as well. So leaving that aside, because it's budgetary and there's a lot of work to be done, and it will be addressed. But on the climate side, I actually see that as more like the soft power discussion, much like childcare, et cetera. We can't force this, but we can ease the way. And to my comments on the previous topic, like that USDA program, TC Light and Power, we as a city could act as a facilitator to help with the bold idea of pilot electrification of homes in Traverse City. And that would help current residents stay in their homes, lower their utility bills, et cetera, improve the insulation quality. So again, it might be a very small budgetary item for the city, but it's more the facilitator and bringing things together and having the know-how, working with TC Light and Power and others to improve things for current residents and lead the way then on climate-related things, because we have, like periodically back in 2016, 2018, and other times, we kind of surge ahead, and Traverse City gets a lot of kudos statewide for what we're doing. And then things calm down and it takes a while. Okay, what's that next big thing? That could be that next big thing that kind of puts us out there again. And it's for the benefit of residents.
Yeah, really good comments too. And I think that this is an area, just again, my observation as the outsider, right? I think this is an area that there's a lot of support for in the community. And I loved your idea about like actually having concrete targets, right? And I know in the previous sort of goals and objectives, the topic was in there, but it wasn't really tied up in sort of really clear targets. And I've watched a number of your commission meetings where there's obviously there's individual issues come in front of you, but they're lacking in the context of. And I think one was about permeable surfaces in a car park extension, something like that, right? And I think that like getting really clear about some of those fundamental values and how you elevate those could really help, I think, a lot of streamline all of those sort of decisions. So every decision is contributing towards your goals, towards some sort of environmental sustainability and so on. But I think there's an enormous area of innovation in this potentially. Yeah, Heather.
I think that a regional approach is important for this, but in fact, we are at the bottom of the hill on the bay. I mean, we're like the drain, and I don't think we're doing a very good job. TCLP has certainly made more progress than I think the city has, even though TCLP is part of the city. But like that stormwater plan that the DDA had done maybe in 2018, it is a great action plan, and it's just sitting on the shelf. Nobody's done anything with it, and that's really too bad. And it seems to me that we just start building like bioswales are just built into when we reconstruct streets. We just always put it in because we flood all over the city, so we just add bioswales. Let's see, what else? The research in number 18, using practices from others. Absolutely. I feel like I do research to look around to see what other people are doing. People are doing amazing things all over. Like Holland uses its wastewater treatment plant to melt its snow. We have a wastewater treatment plant in the city, right in the middle of the city. I mean, that's a big one, but somebody could look into that and see how that's done. The number 19, replicate, get some interface locations. This is a great idea, and Commissioner Werner and I are working on the Brown Bridge Trust. It's a big fund that we're looking to release $3 million, looking to get the citizens to approve releasing $3 million to enhance parks in the city. And one of those is a really big plan for shoreline restoration. So the plan would be to add in all these informational centers. Like why are you planting dune grass that is sort of obstructing my view of the bay? Well, we plant it so that the geese can't see that there's grass on the other side and they don't poop all over the place. Just that kind of thing. It's also maybe an opportunity to have sort of interactive, educational, cultural kinds of Clinch Park has lots of space there. The open space has lots of space for those kinds of projects. I don't know where that would go through parks and stuff. And as for the last one, I agree with Commissioner somebody about policy. We have the policy, the microplastics. But this is, again, I think this is a place to put soft influence. How do we get rid of single plastic use? in all of our events? How do we encourage our service people to stop using single plastic use? Maybe it's a bag, it's a tote bag that's made out of cloth I don't know, that advertises we don't use plastic here, or the city doesn't use plastic. The city should make it a policy to stop using plastic. One more thing at the top too is there anything we can do to strengthen our construction codes so that things like green roofs are promoted in some way? Because we can't do it through zoning. I learned that the hard way.
Well, sorry to crush your dreams, but we also can't do any bans or regulations on single-use plastics because the state legislature.
This is a soft influence. That's what I said.
Yes, in their infinite wisdom, specifically prohibited local municipalities or counties from having regulations on that. So yes, we could do it for our own stuff, but the events where the city is serving food is a relatively small share of those plastic plates and cups and forks that get used in this community and even in our downtown. But this pillar, I'm actually surprised that the ratings for alignment are so low, since on the previous slide, it's something that we both value strongly in our community and we're putting a lot of effort into, which brings up the question for me, do people think we're misaligned because we're not doing things the way, or not focusing on priorities the way that individuals think that they should be? Like, we might be putting in electric car chargers and other people think we should be investing more in public transportation instead. Or is it people thinking that we've done a lot, but their goals are aspiring to be even higher? So yes, we are setting a standard above many other communities in northern Michigan, but how high a standard can we actually set?
Yeah. All right, thank you. Right, so the last one, right? So I presume you want to allow a few minutes for public comment or questions at the end.
please.
So let's do this one quick, right? So building a thriving year-round economy, it's the final pillar. A lot of what's in this will have heard people talk about. The actions that surfaced in this, embracing a sustainable tourism approach, and it's multifaceted. It's got the environmental impact as well as the economic and the quality of life components, high priority from the community, marketing to the remote workforce, we've talked about that, recreational and resource related products and businesses, building on the specialised advanced manufacturing sector. Not areas that there's been really a lot of work by the city, from the judgment, from the work we do with staff. Here's your data on this in terms of how well aligned to not at all aligned to very well aligned. Again, you can see that this is 5.3 was the only one that cracked over a 5, right, in the individual actions. And I think that talks to a lot of the work, the really good work that's been going on around that. But Maya, do you want to take us away?
So I think, again, this along the climate feels like a very much a regional issue and topic where we need to be working collaboratively. As you know, thinking about advanced manufacturing, do we have even one industrial manufacturing park within the city limits? We have one, and Aeroparks, and the remainder are in surrounding townships. But you know, I think this, looking at, I have the concern about marketing us for the remote workforce. The remote workforce is here, and in part that is driving to a certain degree the lack of affordability in our housing. They are bringing their Silicon Valley incomes to our real estate market, and we're the folks that are working in jobs here are still earning half of the pay for the view of the bay, although that's improving. So I do think that where there's excitement around the blue economy, the electric boats there, and the specialized advanced manufacturing, and again, most of this will be happening outside of city limits, but making sure that the city has a seat at the table and being in the conversation around the economic development aspects of this and the impacts on the local residents, the year-round residents who are already here, is going to be key.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
Just a cautionary comment about targeting the remote workforce. If you look at the national numbers, they're declining fairly rapidly, and our local perceptions may not match that because a big employer like Hagerty has such a fairly broad-based remote work policy. But I do think that number 23 and the blue economy has a lot of legs, and I would want to be sure that residents and resident benefits are taken into consideration while this is essentially an economic development initiative. Again, I want to see balance. Are there ways that residents can benefit from that economic development, and be as specific as we can about that?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, as far as building a thriving year-round economy, I guess I'm most in favor of investing in what we have for our current residents. Make what's good even better. Make what's poor good. Like, try to step everything up of what we currently have and make it a better place. I mean, it's a great place, but there's opportunities for improvement. And I guess I'm more in favor of focusing on folks living here now. We make it an even better place. People will hear that. People will know, and they will come, and they will either bring their job with them from Silicon Valley. We're not going to stop them, or they'll move here and start a business, et cetera. So to me, that's economic development, is we just make it an even better place than it already is, but with focus on current residents. And others will continue to come because word spreads.
Yeah. So sort of focusing on that core value proposition, and getting that crisp, and that does the job for you. Yeah.
Here, I second that. I think that the Action 22 and such as it is, because I've seen the numbers too, they're just plummeting. Everybody has to go back to the office. And 23, that's Traverse Connect land. 24 is a regional issue, like Commissioner Stanley said, I agree. And 21 is, I think it goes back to the last pillar 5, was it? About embedding and replicating education at visitor interface locations. If visitors come here and they don't know that we're interested in sustainability, then because we're not telling them, so let's tell them. And that comes through signs and better interactive kind of things. And we have that whole big waterfront down there to put stuff on. And the Con Foster Museum. I mean, maybe that's also a place. Whatever goes in there is more. Maybe we'd like to see something that's more centered on what we're doing for the sustainability of Traverse City.
Yeah. I think that's a bigger conversation the community's wanting to have, actually. It's about the evolution of the tourism economy. And that's hard to kind of surface when you're in an economy that is driven so much by that economic driver. But I certainly heard a lot from the community in the various sessions we had.
Yeah. And talking about the tourism, yes, there are a lot of concerns about the scale of tourism and how much this community promotes tourism continually. But I'd say part of that is that so much of the impact of tourism is during 3 months, or especially 2 weeks of the summer, when if we did have some of those people were here for a fall color tour, which the leaves are starting to change already. Hate to see it this early, but seasons. Or coming up for spring cherry blossoms, or we do have people that come to Hickory Hills or to other ski resorts, but enjoy here in the winter. We are a community that is beautiful in all 4 seasons, and that people have reason to visit here for all 4 seasons. And if the marketing and promotion that does happen for this region can be trying to spread those visitors out and to balance it so that it isn't as acutely taxing our roads, our infrastructure, our stress levels trying to navigate across town, that could be helpful. And I see, yes, remote workers were a thing for a period of time. They've declined. I see that as a potential cliff for any municipality or region that tries to go in that direction, because currently for various grants and programs, if you're trying to get state, federal, MEDC monies, they have scorecards for how many employers you have in a given area, what is your housing portfolio, and other metrics that don't have any accounting for remote workers. So for a project like Lot O, if we're trying to redevelop that with Homestart into housing, they check a box by saying it's in a downtown area, and downtown is defined as 29 consecutive storefronts along one or two main streets. They also check a box by saying you have X number of employers over 50 employees. They check another box by saying you have one employer over 500. That employer is Hagerty. And we don't have 500 people day in, day out at Hagerty. But because the numbers haven't been changed to account for how remote work is actually processed, that still shows up as 500 employees. If they do change, we don't automatically get credit for remote workers that are working somewhere else but are in our community, because they're not at a single job site or in a central area, which would mean more people going to your local cafe on their lunch break, more people that will have happy hours at the same time that will similarly spend money in the local area, people shopping at the same grocery stores.
Thank you. Mayor, last word.
Sure. Just a little one here. So first and foremost, I'm actually going to save the tourism for the last part. I don't disagree with anything that's been said, but a couple other thoughts on it. But building on the specialized manufacturing sector, it was been said that this is a regional, and it is, but I think this is also a matter of recognizing, the comment's been brought up a couple times now. What if we hired somebody and had us a clearinghouse to help people through application processes, That it is a good idea, and Networks Northwest does it, NMCAA does it, Michigan Works does it. There's a lot of groups doing it that we could probably partner with to bring in and have them have a day at the governmental center, things like that. But I come back to this because Michigan Works, Networks Northwest, MMTC, there's a lot of organizations here that are working on the manufacturing aspect that, again, when we're talking about our soft power or we're having conversations, I think it's important for us to be more aware of who's out doing what. And those are more, like MMTC is more, and Michigan Works to a point, are more manufacturing based, but there's a lot of organizations out there that are very collective already that are trying to help move these conversations about jobs. When we renewed our Traverse Connect contract, part of the conversation was the bigger conversation that's starting to happen with Traverse Connect, all the businesses participating, is what are we doing about wages and how are we going to make those sustainable? I know that they just got that grant for the offsetting the rent, but I will say this, it might only be 50 people. But I was talking to a nurse who's my friend's girlfriend, and he used to live here. He's moved too because of job reasons. And I said, for the first couple of years, because of this, if you wanted to come take your nursing degree from Milwaukee and move to Traverse City, there's this rent benefit. And that was something that piqued her interest and she wanted to look at. Because the reality is, it's not just our service workers looking for affordable housing, it's our teachers, it's our fire department, our firemen, it's our police officers. It's not there's a very wide spectrum of people. And so to that end about the remote workers, the other thing about remote working now is where it is remaining, they're paying national average, not Silicon Valley prices anymore. So again, that's not a terrible thing if you're saying, hey, we have high-speed internet for TCLP, so move here instead of Petoskey, or move here instead of a smaller community in the region where we are more of a year-round economy. And it is something to talk about, but I don't think it's something we have to lean hard into, because there are a lot of people out doing this work as part of our regional. I agree with what everybody said about it being a regional solution, but I think there's a lot of regional work being done on it. We just need to educate ourselves better and be louder proponents in that sector as well. And then the other part that I was going to talk about is the tourism. And I hear a lot, and I know it came through at some of the sessions and everything else. And I'm not saying it's wrong at all. To David's point, you're seeing an ad in Detroit for Pure Michigan and come to Traverse City, and you don't want anybody to come. I was born and raised here. My mom was born and raised here. Traverse City is a tourist economy. We shouldn't rely on it. It shouldn't be built to be bigger on that. But people do come. And so where we need to do better, I think, is engaging with Traverse City tourism and other people who are in it. I think the sometimes knee-jerk negative response and tone that some people have, or we have kind of as these conversations, or even the kind of sarcasm as part of some of these conversations, isn't going to benefit us long run. We know that, frankly, they're an organization that brings a lot of people together. They're two of our counties, ours and Benzie now. And also, I mean, they have a pot of money. We know that. The bed tax that gets assessed right now is not ours, it's theirs. And so I think that there's more, I've seen over the last few years, a much more of a willingness from them to come and say, you know, what are we doing? What do we need? And so to that end, I think that there's that conversation that still needs to happen on a bigger scale and a more earnest scale. And the other thing I would say really quickly is, unfortunately, when we talk about the tourist tax, you would think that we'd all be united in that. And then every time something comes, or when I testified in Lansing about that, there's a lot of municipalities and townships that say, well, we don't want to tax because people might not come here because of our city tax or our local tax, and they'll go to the next jurisdiction over. I think we in Traverse City know that's not an issue, but we also have to I don't think that conversation, that's a bigger conversation that we also, I think, have to use our influence on a little bit more, because I don't think it's the gimme that everybody thinks it is outside of Southeast Michigan. So that's kind of my brain dump on all of that. But so I think as far as budget alignment, there's not a ton of budget alignment for us on that. I think the investment in Traverse Connect, helping us bring some of the job seeking and focus on different economies is good. But I think we can all it's a much more soft influence item, even though it's huge.
Okay, thank you. Good final say. So next step. So this has been fantastic, right? To be able to
5:30 on the nose.
I know.
Yeah.
So I want to give you a minute for questions as
Yeah.
well, but I do just like next steps on this, right? Obviously, we wanted to give you a chance to kind of just really talk from your kind of core about your reaction to these ideas that the community generated. I think this provides a lot of kind of overlay and nuance. And what Benjamin and I have been talking about is that our next step is we want to take basically each one of these pillars and work it up as here is, I guess, a proposition for how the budgeting and the programming in the city could evolve to get closer to it, right? Now, we're looking 3 to 5 years out, so it's not like, you know, January it all flips, right? But it's going to get us onto a trajectory. And I think there's a really interesting set of layers in here of like kind of hard budget and sort of program issues, but there's a lot that you talked about that's really about your voice and influence. And I think that sort of may get expressed in sort of values and, you know, sort of the key objectives and some of those things, not necessarily straight into hard sort of key results, but we'll work on that. And I think the next time we come together will be getting you to react to that. This is still a little bit draft because we have a couple of commissioners still to finish the survey, and I know one of the candidates did it between, I downloaded the data this morning and today, right? So we'll see whether we can get the additional candidates to complete that. But I think this is a cracking good start to that conversation. So Benjamin, thank you for helping put this together.
Thank you, and I want to thank Colleen Pavelio too for all of her work all along the way. And I just want to say how much I appreciate the conversation that the commission had. The amount of context and perspective that you shared, I think, is helpful, and will, I hope, give us something to come back to you with that you can help us make sure that we're distilling what you're saying in the way that you meant it. So thank you very much.
So this is a meeting, and I want to give people a chance to have their voice. We do have a meeting at 7 o'clock tonight. So I'm going to ask with kindness that we do 2 minutes public comment if anybody wants to. We are going to be continuing this conversation. This is the very, very first look and very first reactions. There's potential for another survey. There's going to be more discussions on each pillar as we talked about. There's going to be just a lot more discussions. This is a first glance. We want to hear if anybody has any overall thoughts, kind of like where we're at of our impressions. But I also would ask that kind of keep that to your first reactions and not worry that because you heard something here, it's inherently what you have to talk us out of, because I think there's a lot of big conversations that are happening. And ultimately it's going to be another body too that does some of this. So Sarah has her portable mic. I think someone will somebody could just bring it over to our audience, and people just raise your hands if you want to speak and share any information. But
The only thing I ask is that you state your name for me.
yes. Oh, see, I said
Did Amy scare you?
I said 2 minutes and I scared everybody. You can have 3 if
Everybody
you
wants
want
to go home and have dinner.
Yeah, right. I know. We're all hungry.
Oh, yeah, I didn't pack pizza.
All right. Well, we look forward to seeing a lot of engaged people here. We look forward to seeing, I'm sure, many, if not all of you, at all of our future conversations. And again, we're doing a lot more ways that you all share your input. And thank everyone who shared their input already. I need to do anything else?
No.
Okay. I'm going to adjourn this meeting for anybody who wants a part 2, 7 o'clock tonight, Little Center.